Let's Get To presents Goodwood, knocking around the majors with Andy Tom Chesson.
So we're going to jump into Goodwood this morning with Andy Tom Chesson. And Andy, we've actually got, a Major League Baseball political decision. Now we're getting the tweets of players should just shut up and not get involved in politics. But Major League Baseball has pulled the All-Star game and the draft out of the Atlanta, Georgia area as a result of them passing their voting law. Good decision by Major League Baseball or overstepping?
I think you have to look at it in the historical context of Major League Baseball and their stellar record of social issues and change as those things, are part of the American society. And this goes back to, literally the Gentleman's Agreement, which prevented African-American players and really anybody who didn't have a Latin last name with darker skin from playing baseball until 1947. That wasn't a quick reaction to the result of the Civil War, frankly. And that's how far it goes back. So you're literally talking about 1947 before you let an African-American man play baseball. And since then, it's only gotten slightly better from a standpoint of Major League Baseball deciding to get involved with anything. So
they were even, going back to last year, they were even the slowest league to have any sort of opinion on the George Floyd situation.
Absolutely. And I think they take their time to weigh, or at least historically have taken their time, A, not to disrupt the business, but B, to weigh how this is going to affect ticket sales ultimately. And this was kind of a step forward for them historically to say, this is wrong, this is voter suppression. We can see that it's voter suppression no matter what you call it, no matter what you wrap it in, this is what it is, and we don't want to be a part of it. And I think it is necessary. I do agree with the move, but I also think it's a little bit calculated on Major League Baseball's part because 100% they're trying to appeal to younger voters. And this is an issue that absolutely younger voters care about.
One of the things I found interesting was the pushback from it. To me, when I read the news, I was, completely makes sense. This is what they should do. And we'd already seen precedent. We saw precedent with Disney pulling productions out of North Carolina after the bathroom bill, things like that. I was shocked to see so many people that I would have thought, being in favor of the move, including some of the voting rights activists in Georgia being against the move, I guess citing the fact that it wasn't fair to take $60 billion worth of business away. Is it one thing when you pull out of North Carolina where there's largely nothing versus pulling it out of a major metropolitan area like Atlanta? Is that the issue, or is it just it affects me more directly, so now I want to be upset about the move?
I think that's more of it. I think it's the I'm more affected, so I care kind of thing. The reality is if you're doing the right thing, it shouldn't matter if it's North Carolina where there is no business, or it's Georgia where you have a major league team who is a World Series favorite at this point. Those things shouldn't matter if you know that you're doing the right thing. And I'm, giving Major League Baseball the benefit of the doubt, which, as we know, if we've listened to previous episodes of this segment, is difficult for me. I think, their intentions are in the right place. And ultimately, yes, it affects businesses. No, it's not fair to people who don't have control about it. But it literally is the only voice Major League Baseball has in affecting things for their constituents. And so if it takes a bold master stroke, a huge effort, a huge gesture to have their voices heard, I think that's right. I think that's what you do. And I say that as somebody sitting in Houston, Texas, knowing that we have a similar bill sitting in our state legislature right now that if it's passed would potentially preclude Dallas or Houston from ever having an all-star game, or at least in the the near future, not that we're in the rotation. And then the danger of it, I think, is that you potentially are going to be in a place where maybe Seattle, California, and New York are the only places that you can have an all-star game if you're going to host it in one of your major league stadiums, which I'm guessing Rob Manfred wouldn't care about, because if it's in New York, he can just roll out to the draft for the first two picks and then disappear and hand it off to one of his underlings. He doesn't attend the all-star game anyway, because why would he? So little loss for him.
Yeah, and it does seem, there are, no matter how you want to look at it, some of the things that are in this bill For example, I know, at least in one version of it, no early voting on Sundays. And we know that a lot of African-American churches go to church and then they vote early voting as a collective group, handing out food and water, things like that, limiting the polling places. All of those things do add up to voter suppression.
Absolutely. And you talk about in Texas, the Texas bill, and I know Georgia has a similar thing, allowing early voting, but limiting it to 5 o'clock every day. And I think starting at like 9. So if you are somebody who works 8 to 5, you can't vote early. If you are somebody who is a shift worker and you go, say, 3 to 11 or work overnight, you now have to decide, do I go to sleep and take care of all the other things I have to take care of, or do I go vote? And knowing that you're potentially going to be living in a place where the polling places are limited, now you have to anticipate waiting in line. And if you're waiting in line, you have to anticipate waiting in line for hours, and no one's allowed to hand you a bottle of water. There's some reading of the Texas rule that says maybe you can't even bring water. Maybe they don't let food in the polling place or online at all. That way, just to remove any suspicion. So now you're asking people to potentially sit, and I'm not making this number up, 8 hours in line for the privilege of voting, the right of voting. No food, no water, no place to, can't sit. That's another thing. There's no sitting when you're in line. No drive-through voting, because that's somehow illegal and bad. So all these things combined are absolutely targeting the working class person. And the working class person tends to skew younger, tends to vote Democrat. And so that's where this is coming from. And it's hugely interesting to me that the right, who is very much a proponent of these laws in Georgia and a proponent of these laws in Texas and other states where they're being proposed, are screaming cancel culture when it comes to MLB. Screaming that, we need to boycott MLB. And to them, I say Dixie Chicks.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And just to further your point, when you make it harder, and this, and I'll say this to those people that maybe don't see the problem with some of the provisions of the bill because it doesn't occur to them. But those of the people who do work hourly shifts, hourly wages, they can't take the time off. You and I can get time off pretty much whenever we want to.
Right.
That is the privilege that we are living our lives in. They do skew young, they skew lower economic, which means they also skew people of color. And so if you don't see it as suppression, yeah, of course it's not going to be a sign like back in the day that said Irish need not apply. Of course it's not that. They're smarter than that. It is definitely some form of suppression.
Yep. And I think that's ultimately the issue. And I think that Major League Baseball is absolutely right in taking a stand on this topic, no matter who it hurts from a business perspective. And I think ultimately you have to kind of look at it from a blind perspective and say, is this the right thing to do? Yes, we'll deal with the fallout later, versus what's the fallout and then figure out how to act.
And then right, that is very.
And I think, one of the few times I'm, happy to say, I think Major League Baseball is on the right side of history with this.
Last question, because we're a Major League Baseball show talking about Major League Baseball things. How long do you think Ohtani is going to really be able to – I feel like every year it's the same thing. He's the greatest player ever play, and then something happens. He did have a 100-mile-an-hour pitch and an over 100 exit velo yesterday on the day we're recording this, excuse me. So how long can he keep this up?
Health is one of those interesting things. Nothing that has happened to him is what I would consider a chronic injury, right? But it's this series of things that keep him out of action or keep him limited to being a normal baseball player. So he can either pitch or he can hit. In the last couple of years, he hadn't been able to pitch because he's recovering from basically a Tommy John surgery, although for some reason they don't call it that with him. So he's able to hit, and he's half the player that Major League Baseball really wants him to be the guy who has the 115 exit velo and throws 100 miles an hour. They are pumping him hard and have been literally all spring and really since he came over from Japan. I just even last night with those two incredible moments in that game, he still didn't get out of the fifth inning. Mm-hmm. He still left the fifth inning because he was hurt. And there's still such a clown show around him. If you watch that sequence of events that led to the Angels losing their lead temporarily, It was a throw to the plate, I think, that bounced 100 feet, 200 feet away. It just allowed it looked like the 2012 or 2013 Astros. As an Astros fan, it was just every blooper reel thing you could have happened in that play, and that's the Angels. They had hit a whole lot. They scored 7 runs last night. Pitching is suspect, and their defense is not good. So that's good record for a 500 team, which I think is where most people who know what they're talking about have the Angels at. MLB.com, of course, has them winning the division, which is why they're pumping Ohtani in the first place. I just don't think with him, all these things add up. And at some point you look at, we know that pitching a baseball is an unnatural motion, right?
Right.
It's not something you can do well into your 40s unless you are the 1%, like an Olin Ryan, like a Gaylord Perry. I mean, there's just very few examples, and there's some, but most people are done by 35. That's the reality of baseball. I just don't see, with the mileage he has on him from Japan, and what we've seen so far in his major league career, that he's a guy that's going to hold up for an entire season. And the Angels, if they were smart, and again, this is the team that gave Albert Pujols a 10-year contract that's paying him into his 50s, evidently. Not as bad as Bobby Bonilla's contract, which will still be paying him.
Still being paid, yeah.
Decades from now. Let him pitch, let him hit, but just pick one, because I think his body would have time to recover. His body would have time to be what it could be, rather than let's have this freak show that ultimately doesn't win games. And that's the status he's in right now. He's a freak show, great thing to watch. And you look at Twitter last night as he was going through the first few innings, just comment after comment about this guy's special, this guy's incredible, so much fun to watch. But how much fun is it to watching him sitting on the bench because he's hurt more than half the time so far in his major league career?
Yeah, and there was even a lot of national writers saying that even with his pitch count, he should have been out before the collision at the plate. He is Andy Tom Chesson. This is Goodwood. We will be back next week to see what's going on in Major League Baseball.